I vanished after my wife slapped me at her birthday dinner. 5 years later, I returned home and heard the shocking truth about my ex-wife. The slap landed before I even finished my sentence. Not a shove, not a glass thrown in anger, a full, open-handed slap across my face in front of 11 people sitting around the birthday dinner table I had paid for at the restaurant I had reserved, 3 weeks in advance, on the night I had spent the entire afternoon preparing, with flowers she said she loved. The room went silent, in the way rooms only go silent when something crosses a line nobody ever thought would be crossed. I sat there for 2 full seconds. My cheek was burning. My ears were ringing. Candlelight threw shadows across 12 faces staring at me. 11 guests, and Margot, my wife of 7 years, still holding the pose, her hand still raised slightly, her eyes wide with a kind of righteous fury I had never seen before and will never forget. I did not yell. I did not stand up dramatically. I did not throw water in anyone's face, tip over the table, or say a single word. I folded my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, stood up, walked to the coat rack by the entrance, put on my jacket, and walked out of Carmine's Italian Kitchen on Euclid Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, into a November night, cold enough to freeze tears before they had a chance to fall. That was the last time Margot ever saw me as her husband. My name is Elias. I am 39 years old. I am a civil engineer, and for most of my adult life, I was the kind of man who believed quiet dedication was its own reward. I grew up in Findlay, Ohio, a town of about 40,000 people, halfway between Columbus and Toledo. It was the kind of place where everybody still knew your family name, where your high school football jersey could hang in the gymnasium for 15 years, and where people ask about your father before they ask about you. My father, Gerald, was a structural engineer. He was a careful man, a quiet man, a man who believed the way you built a bridge was the same way you built a life, with patience, with precision, and with the understanding that the load you carried determined the material you used. He died of a heart attack when I was 24. I was in my second year of graduate school at Ohio State when I got the call. I drove home that same night, and I have spent every year since trying to be the kind of man he was. After I finished my degree, I moved to Columbus and got a job with a mid-sized civil engineering firm called Harlow and Associates. I did highway drainage design. It was boring work, at least to most people. It was the kind of work nobody noticed unless something went wrong, which meant that if you were good at your job, you were essentially invisible. I was good at my job. I met Margot at a work event in 2013. She was there with a colleague who was a mutual connection. She was 31 then, sharp, immediately funny, in the kind of way that disarms you completely before you realize you have lowered your guard. She worked in healthcare marketing. She had an apartment near Short North. She had opinions about everything: restaurants, films the correct way to pack a carry-on suitcase, and whether it was ever acceptable to put ketchup on scrambled eggs. She was alive in a way that made rooms feel brighter when she entered them. I fell completely in love with her in about 3 weeks. We were married 2 years later, in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Columbus. There were 40 people there: her parents, her sister, some college friends, my mother, my brother Nate, and a handful of close friends from work. It was a good day, one of the best days I can remember. The first few years were genuinely happy. We bought a house in Worthington, a 1970s colonial with a finished basement and a backyard that backed up to a creek. I renovated the kitchen myself over the course of a summer. I pulled up the old linoleum, replaced the cabinets, and retiled the backsplash. Margot would bring me coffee stand in the doorway and tell me she could not believe she had married someone who actually knew how to do things with his hands. I believed we were building something. The cracks started so slowly that I mistook them for normal settling. That is the thing about structural damage. If you do not know what you are looking at, you can watch a foundation shift for years and convince yourself it is nothing. Margot started working longer hours around year 3. That was not unusual. Her company was growing, she had been promoted. I was proud of her. So I picked up more of the housework, more of the cooking, more of the calendar management. I thought that was what partnership looked like. Then came the social world that slowly, deliberately excluded me. Margot had a group of friends, mostly women, a few couples, who had grown up with money in a way I had not. Private schools, family beach houses, the kind of casual wealth that does not announce itself, but is woven into every reference, every plan, every assumption about what a weekend should look like. Her best friend was a woman named Brianna, married to a hedge fund manager named Trevor, who owned a condo in Aspen and mentioned it in casual conversation the way other people mentioned what they had for lunch. I did not fit in that world. I knew it, and I think Margot knew it too. But for a long time, she pretended it did not matter. By year 5, it mattered. She started making comments, small ones, the kind that came with a smile, the kind that made you wonder if you were being too sensitive. Elias wore a sport coat to the fundraiser that was not quite right for the event. Elias told a story that went on a little too long. Elias did not really know that much about wine. Elias was more of a beer guy. She always said it lightly, the way people say something is a joke when they mean every word. By year 6, I was starting to wonder if she was ashamed of me. I want to be honest about something. I am not a man who talks about his feelings easily. I was raised by a man who expressed love through action, by showing up, by fixing things, by being present and reliable. I did not have the language for what was happening inside me, and I think that silence cost me things I will never fully recover. I should have said something earlier. I should have sat down and named what I was noticing. I did not. I went to work. I came home. I renovated the upstairs bathroom, and I planned Margot's birthday dinner. Her birthday was November 9th. She was turning 39. She had told me in September that she wanted something special that year, something that would impress her friends. She mentioned Carmine specifically, a newer Italian place on Euclid that had been getting written up in Columbus Monthly. The kind of restaurant with a prefix menu and a sommelier who spoke about wine the way ministers speak about scripture. I made the reservation in October. I arranged the guest list with Margot, 11 people. Her closest friends, her sister Dana and Dana's husband. 2 couples from her work, Brianna and Brianna's husband, Trevor. I sent handwritten notes inviting each couple. I drove to a florist in German Village 3 days before the dinner and ordered a centerpiece arrangement in her favorite colors. The morning of her birthday, I left her a card on the kitchen counter before I went to work. The card was simple. I had written 4 sentences. I am not a man who writes easily, and those 4 sentences had taken me 20 minutes to get right. She texted me at noon to confirm the reservation time, nothing else. That should have told me something. I got to Carmine's 40 minutes early to check the arrangement, speak with the manager, and make sure everything was right. The flowers were perfect. The private dining room they had set up in the back looked warm and elegant. I ordered a bottle of wine to open before the guests arrived. Everyone arrived within about 20 minutes of each other. Margot came in with Brianna, which I thought was a little odd. I had assumed she would arrive with me, but I did not say anything. I pulled out her chair. I poured her wine. I introduced myself again to a few people I had only met briefly before. Dinner was going well. The food was excellent. The conversation was warm in the way it gets when people are genuinely comfortable with each other. For the first time in weeks, I was relaxing. And then, somewhere between the second and third course, Trevor made a comment about a real estate deal he was working on. Something about a mixed-use development on the west side. He turned to me almost as an afterthought and said, "Elias, you're in construction, right?" I corrected him gently. Civil engineering, actually. Infrastructure, mostly. Highway drainage, bridge systems. He nodded in the way people nod when they are not actually listening. Right, he said. So like contracting work. Margot laughed, not a polite laugh. Not the kind of laugh you give when you are trying to smooth something over. A genuine, from-the-chest laugh. The kind that comes out when something catches you off guard and you find it sincerely funny. "Elias is very good at what he does," she said, to the table, still smiling. "He's just not exactly the most, I don't know. He's a very practical person." The table went slightly quiet. Not silent, not yet. Just that brief pause that happens when a comment lands in a way nobody expected. I looked at her. 7 years. I looked at my wife of 7 years, at the table I had arranged. On the birthday I had planned. And I said very calmly, "Margot, that's not a very kind thing to say." The silence that followed was different. Longer. Her expression shifted. And then She slapped me. The Uber I called from the sidewalk outside Carmine's brought me home in 14 minutes. I remember watching the city move past the window and thinking about load calculations. A structure does not usually fail because of a single catastrophic event. It fails because accumulated stress reaches the limit of what the material can bear. I had reached my limit. I did not cry. Not yet. I walked into the house, went upstairs to the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed for approximately 3 minutes. Then I got up, pulled 2 suitcases out of the closet, and started packing. I packed systematically, the way my father would have. Clothes, documents, the hard drive with my project files, my father's old drafting compass that I kept on my desk, a photograph of my mother and brother from Christmas 2 years earlier, my laptop. I did not pack anything that was ours. I packed only what was mine. I was finished in 45 minutes. I called my brother Nate from the driveway. He lives in Dayton. He picked up on the second ring and I told him what had happened. He did not pause. He did not ask me whether I was sure. He just said, "Come here tonight, right now. Don't go anywhere else." So I drove to Dayton. Margot texted me 3 times while I was on I-70. I did not read any of the messages until the next morning. The first said, "Where are you?" The second said, "I'm sorry, I lost my temper. We can talk." The third said, "Elias, please come home so we can discuss this like adults." I read them sitting at Nate's kitchen table with a cup of coffee at 7 a.m. Then I put my phone face down on the table and told Nate everything. All of it. Not just the slap. The years that had led to it. The comments. The embarrassment. The way I had watched myself become smaller and smaller in my own marriage, until I was barely a supporting character in my wife's social life. Nate is 3 years older than me. He has 2 kids and a wife who coaches middle school soccer. He restores vintage motorcycles in his garage on weekends. He is the least complicated person I know. He listened to everything I said without interrupting. Then he said, "You know, you're not going back, right?" I knew. The following week, I hired an attorney in Columbus. Her name was Sandra Park. A colleague referred me to her. She was efficient, direct, and allergic to drama. When I explained the situation, she asked me one question. "Do you want to negotiate or do you want out?" I said I wanted out cleanly. She said she could do that. The divorce took 9 months. Margot pushed back on the house. There were things I was legally entitled to that I simply let go, because I did not want the years it would take to fight for them. I left Columbus with my engineering license, my savings, my father's drafting compass, and a clarity I had not felt in years. I transferred to a position with a larger infrastructure firm based in Pittsburgh, HDR Engineering, serious work. I was brought in on a bridge rehabilitation project on Interstate 376 over the Monongahela River. It was exactly the kind of work my father would have respected. Complex load analysis. Historic structure with updated performance requirements. The kind of project where you show up every morning knowing what you are doing matters even if nobody outside the industry will ever know your name. I rented an apartment in Lawrenceville, the kind of neighborhood in Pittsburgh that has actual character. Old brick buildings, good coffee shops, people who actually talk to each other on the street. I ran along the river in the mornings. I cooked my own food. I went to work early and stayed late. And I came home to a quiet that felt like freedom instead of loneliness. In the first year, I barely existed socially, and that was fine. I needed the silence to rebuild. In year 2, I started going to a weekly poker game at a colleague's house. Just 6 guys, a $20 buy-in, genuinely bad food, genuinely good conversation. One of those men was a structural engineer named Owen Page, who had grown up in Pittsburgh and knew every contractor and developer in western Pennsylvania by first name. Owen became one of the best friends I have ever had. He is the kind of person who makes you remember what it feels like to be known. In year 3, I started consulting on projects outside HDR. Owen introduced me to a developer named Bruce Whitfield, who was doing mid-rise residential work in East Liberty and needed someone who understood both the structural and drainage side of things. I did 2 projects for Bruce. Both went well. Bruce introduced me to his investor group. The investor group met quarterly at a private dinner at a club in Shadyside. There were usually 12 to 15 people there. mostly business owners and commercial real estate developers, with the occasional attorney or fund manager. They shared deal flow, discussed projects, and vetted each other's opportunities. It was not a formal club, it had no name. It was just a group of people who had built things and trusted each other. I had been attending for about 8 months when Bruce mentioned that the group was expanding to a second chapter in Findlay, Ohio, my hometown. He said they were planning a launch dinner there in late spring and invited me to attend as part of the Pittsburgh contingent. I had not been back to Findlay in 4 years. I said yes without hesitating. My mother still lived there. My Aunt Patricia was still there. And honestly, some part of me wanted to see what it felt like to return as someone different from the person who had left. I drove to Findlay on a Thursday morning in May. I stopped at my mother's house first. She lives on a quiet street near Riverside Park in the same house where Nate and I grew up. She had painted the front door a deep blue since my father died, and planted the kind of garden along the front walk my father always said he would get to eventually. She made coffee. We sat on the back porch for 2 hours. She asked me careful questions about my life in Pittsburgh, and I told her the truth about how good it had become. The dinner was that evening at the Findlay Country Club. About 30 people attended. The Pittsburgh group, the local Findlay contingent, a few guests from Columbus and Toledo. It was the kind of dinner where everyone had a business card and a firm handshake, and the conversation had the specific energy of people who had made something real and wanted to talk about making more. I was in the middle of a conversation about infrastructure investment in secondary markets when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I did not recognize. Columbus area code. I stepped out into the hallway and answered, "Is this Elias Carver?" "It is." "My name is Phil Reeves. I'm an attorney in Columbus. I'm calling because I represent a party in an estate matter and your name has come up in connection with some documents we're reviewing." He paused. "This is a sensitive call and I want to be careful with how I deliver some information. Are you somewhere you can speak privately?" I told him I was. "Mr. Carver," he said, "I need to inform you that your former wife Margot passed away 6 days ago." The hallway of the Findlay Country Club is decorated with photos of its members going back to the 1940s. Row after row of serious Ohio faces in formal portraits. I stood there, looking at none of them, my hand against the wall, listening to Phil Reeves explain what had happened to the woman I had once loved more than anything in my life. Margot had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of ovarian cancer 14 months earlier. She had not told many people. She had kept working as long as she could, then stopped. About 4 months before she died, she moved in with her sister Dana and Dana's husband. She passed away quietly in hospice. She was 43 years old. Then Phil Reeves told me something else. In the weeks before she died, Margot had written letters, several of them. One was for her sister, one was for her closest friends, and one was for me. He told me a package had been mailed to my mother's address in Findlay at Margot's instruction because she did not have my current Pittsburgh address. My mother had received it 2 days earlier. She had not told me because she did not know whether Margot had told me about the illness, and she had not wanted to cause me pain at an event she knew was important to me. I thanked Phil Reeves for the call. I went back into the dining room and told Bruce I needed to leave early. I shook hands with the people I had met. Then I drove to my mother's house. She was still awake. The package was on the kitchen table. She held my hand while I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. 7 pages on plain white paper, front and back, written in Margot's handwriting, which I would have recognized anywhere. I am not going to tell you every word of it. Some of it is mine to keep. But I will tell you what she said. She told me she had spent the 2 years after our divorce in therapy working with a psychologist in Columbus, trying to understand what she had done and why she had done it. She had come to understand through that work that her behavior in the last years of our marriage had been a kind of performance. Not for me, for Brianna and Brianna's world. A world Margot had been trying to belong to since college, and had never quite succeeded in entering the way she wanted. She wrote that she had been ashamed, not of me, of her own insecurity. And she had taken that shame and aimed it at the one person who had never given her any reason to feel it. She wrote about the slap directly. She called it the worst thing she had ever done. She said she had never in her life felt more humiliated than she felt in the moment after her hand came down. Not because of who was watching, because of the look on my face. She said I had looked at her the way you look at something you finally understand. She said she had tried to find a way to reach out to me for 3 years, but could not bring herself to do it. She said she was glad I had built something good in Pittsburgh because she had asked Dana to find out gently through mutual connections and had heard that I was working on serious projects and had good people in my life. She said she was sorry. Not in the way people say sorry when they want something in return. In the way people say it when they have nothing left to gain, and the only thing left to give is the truth. And then she told me something I did not know. She told me that in the months after the divorce, she had pulled away from Brianna and that entire social world. She had found it increasingly difficult to be around people whose approval she had bent herself into shapes to earn. She had started spending her time differently, volunteering at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, doing administrative work in their development office. She had found a purpose there that she described as the first real thing she had done in years. She said she had died knowing she was loved by people who knew who she actually was. And she said she hoped that wherever I was, I had found the same. I sat in my mother's kitchen for a long time after I finished reading. My mother made more coffee and put a plate of food in front of me that I did not eat. She sat across from me and let the silence be what it needed to be. She has always known when to speak and when to simply be present. And that night, she understood there was nothing she could say that would make what I was feeling simpler or cleaner. What I felt was not grief exactly, or not only grief. It was something more complicated. The kind of feeling you have when a chapter you thought you had already closed turns out to have pages you had not read yet. I grieved the woman she might have been if she had found her way to herself sooner. I grieved the years in our marriage when I had been slowly disappearing and had not known how to stop it. I grieved the fact that the apology that should have come in the Carmine's parking lot on a November night years earlier had arrived instead in an envelope in my mother's kitchen. Too late for anything to be repaired, only acknowledged. But I also felt something that surprised me. I felt grateful. Not grateful that she was gone, not grateful for any of the pain, but grateful that she had done the work. That she had sat in a therapist's office and looked at herself honestly. That she had named what she had done. That she had written 7 pages in her own handwriting and arranged for them to reach me because she wanted the truth to exist somewhere between us before she ran out of time. That takes courage. A kind of courage I am not sure I fully appreciated until I sat with those pages in my hands. People are complicated. That is not a comfort, it is just true. The woman who slapped me was real. The woman who wrote those 7 pages was also real. They were the same woman. I had loved her. She had failed me. She had known it, and she had not let herself die without saying so. I stayed in Findlay for 4 days. I had breakfast with my mother every morning. I drove past my old high school, past the park where my father used to take us fishing, past the parking lot of the hardware store where I had my first job at 15. I sat at the cemetery for a while with my hand on my father's headstone. I told him about the bridge project, about Pittsburgh, about the dinner at the club, about Margot's letter. I do not know if he heard me. I believe it mattered that I said it. On the second day, I called Owen from the parking lot of a coffee shop on Sandusky Street and told him what had happened. Owen listened the way Owen always listens, completely, without rushing toward a conclusion. When I finished, he said, "Are you okay?" I told him I was. And I meant it in the complicated way you mean things when the honest answer is layered. Then Owen said, "Come back when you're ready, and let's finish the East Liberty proposal, because Whitfield is getting anxious, and I need your drainage calculations by Friday." I laughed for the first time in 3 days. That is friendship. That is what it looks like when someone who cares about you knows the best thing they can do is remind you that the work is waiting and that you are needed. On my last evening in Findlay, I drove out to the Blanchard River just before sunset. It is a slow, flat river that runs through the western edge of town, bordered by cottonwoods and farmland and the occasional osprey platform the county put up about 10 years ago. I used to fish there with my father on Sunday afternoons. We never caught much. That was never the point. I stood there watching the water move in the low evening light and thought about what my father used to say about bridges. "A bridge doesn't fight the load," he told me once when I was maybe 12 years old, and we were watching a freight train cross the old railroad trestle north of town. "It accepts the load. It distributes it. It finds a way to carry what's put on it without breaking. The engineer's job is to make sure the structure knows how to do that." I thought about Margot. I thought about the 7 years we had built together and the night they ended. I thought about the letter and the apology that came too late to change anything, but early enough to change something. I thought about Pittsburgh, the bridge over the Monongahela, Owen, the quiet apartment in Lawrenceville, the poker game, the investor dinner, the drive home to Findlay, and my mother's kitchen table. I thought about my father's drafting compass sitting in my bag in the trunk of my car. I carried it everywhere I went, not because I needed it for work, but because I needed to know it was there. The load of a life. What you accept, what you distribute, what you find a way to carry. I was not broken. I had never been broken. I had bent the way good structural material bends, and I had found my way back to my true shape. When I drove back to Pittsburgh, I arrived in the early afternoon. I parked on my street in Lawrenceville, carried my bag up to my apartment, made a pot of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with Owen's notes on the East Liberty proposal. Then I got back to work. That week, I finished the drainage calculations. The proposal went in on Thursday. Bruce accepted it on Friday. Months later, ground broke on the East Liberty development. As of today, it is the largest residential project I have been personally responsible for, from foundation design through site drainage. When it is finished, somewhere between 300 and 400 people will live in that building. They will never know my name. They will not know that the engineer who designed the drainage system once packed a suitcase at midnight and drove to his brother's house in Dayton because he could no longer bear the weight of a life that was making him disappear. They will just live there, safely, in a structure designed to carry its load. That is enough for me. That is more than enough. I still have Margot's letter. It is in the same cedar box where I keep my father's drafting compass, the photograph of my mother and brother, and a few other things that matter in ways I do not always have language for. I have read it twice since that first night. I do not think I will read it many more times. Not because it is painful, but because I have already taken what it gave me, and I do not need to go back to it the way you do not need to return to the place where you learned to walk. I forgave her, not for her sake. She was already gone. I forgave her for mine. Because my father taught me that you do not leave unnecessary load on a structure. You distribute it. You let it pass through. I am 39 years old. I am a civil engineer living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, working on projects that matter, surrounded by people I trust. I am not the man who sat in a restaurant on Euclid Avenue trying to say the right thing to someone who had already stopped listening. I am not the man who drove to Dayton at midnight wondering where everything went wrong. I am the man who packed his things and vanished, then built something real from what was left. And if there is anything I know, anything I want to say to whoever is sitting with this story right now, in whatever city, in whatever version of what I used to feel, it is this. The things that almost break you are also the things that show you exactly what you are made of. You do not discover your own strength when everything is going well. You discover it in the parking lot of a restaurant in November, with a burning cheek, a folded napkin, and nowhere to go but forward. You are built for more than you have been given so far. Trust that. Do the work. Show up. The bridge holds. What hits me hardest about my own story now is not only the slap. It is the 7 years before it. The slow, quiet erosion of a man who kept showing up, kept building, kept loving, while someone slowly taught him to feel small. That is the real damage. Not just the moment everything breaks. The years you spend shrinking to fit a space that was never meant for you. If you are in that place right now, hear me clearly. Leaving is not losing. Sometimes walking out that door is the most powerful thing you will ever do. I did not just survive. I became. And so can you.